Good morning. The science of early childhood development is clear. ECD is the foundation for health, for education, for economic productivity, for social cohesion, for social healing that we heard today. Yet, only a third of our children in South Africa have that foundation. And unless we find some way to radically change that situation, we're going to be bogged down in a state of increasing chronic illness, low educational outcomes, poor economic productivity. We've got to look for the game changers and not simply be concerned about trying to develop systematic investments in what has been done before. So today I'd like to present to you just 5 game changers that I think can radically change the way that early childhood development is perceived and implemented. I'll start with the reality for each of them and then present to you what I see as the game changer. We know that in assessing education in South Africa, often typically the annual national assessments are used, and we know that for home language and for numeracy, the outcomes in grade 3 are very, very poor. But by grade 6, the outcomes are even worse. And so much is focused on grade 4, 5, and 6. What's happening in the classroom? What's happening with the teachers? Why is that degradation happening between grade 3 and grade 6? Well, certainly one has to focus on grade 3 to grade 6, but we need to understand that the roots of the problem are lying far behind at the time of conception, at the time of birth, and the first few years of life. If we think of 2 children conceived and born today in Bloemfontein on this day, one rich, one poor, those children are already on fundamentally different life trajectories. And so I think the first game changer is the one that Sherry's alluded to. We have to reframe education. If we have a look at the deficits that we see in education, we tend to say, how do we remediate? How do we overcome those deficits at grade 4, 5, and 6? Well, the problem is at the bottom, not at the top. The missing blocks of nutrition, of early childhood stimulation, of parenting are the critical ones that are resulting in that deficit. And that's the reframing that is needed as we try and address many of the challenges we have in South Africa. Reality number 2. If we look at our focus on early learning in South Africa, we immediately jump to facilities. We speak about ECD centers, and the funds follow the center. If there's a center that is located in a particular community and they're registered, they can apply for funding. But the system is completely blind and oblivious to all of the children, the majority of the children who happen to be living around that center. So game changer number 2, we have to be concerned about all of the children in a defined geographical area, starting from conception, through pregnancy, through age-differentiated programs from 2 to 4 to 6, understanding the different needs of those children and defining district-based programs that seek to achieve access of 80, 90, 100% for the children. Reality number 3, early childhood development is so cross-cutting. We know it concerns health, education, social development, home affairs, and we're constantly obsessing with the need to coordinate. And the best we can do in order to coordinate is to rely on each other's goodwill and to have meetings. Well, that's not going to fly. That's not going to improve the lives of the children. Game changer number 3. We need a head start, an oportunidades in South Africa, some sort of all-stars franchise that holds together early childhood development, that gives us a sense of focus, gives us a sense of direction, that is spearheaded by a national agency, by provincial agencies, and serves to coordinate the activities that are happening at a district level. That's the only way in which we're going to truly make a quantum leap forward in terms of ECD. Reality number 4. We know that subsidies for children in centers is meant to be for the poorest children. The means test is meant to exclude the wealthier children. But we know that if you have a look at the picture here, those children in quintile 5, the wealthiest children, have double the exposure to ECD than the children in the poorest quintile. What's going on? Because it's facilities based and because those centres have to be registered, kids going to the poor centres just don't have enough resources. The infrastructure is poor, the quality is poor, so those centres can't get registered. They don't get registered, so they don't get money to improve their services. So these children are stuck in a vicious cycle. Game changer number 4. Let's put more power in the hands of parents. How about giving parents vouchers, giving them funding, supplementing the conditional grant with some sort of condition that puts money into the hands of parents to decide where their children can go. If we can do that, we can have pro-poor access to services and hopefully a way of really stimulating quality. And the last one, none of this is going to happen unless we have the people to do it. And we don't have a system and infrastructure in place that is systematically relating supply of practitioners to need. And worse still, if you have a look at the training that is offered, at level 4 and level 5 we have centre-based training. We don't have level 4 training for community-based activities. This is accredited training. Program management is offered by a lot of NGOs, but it's unaccredited. There's no progression. And if you get a level 6 diploma, there's no way that you can progress and move into university if you wish. So the final game changer. Let's start with a set of services that need to be provided on the ground. What is this essential package? Who's going to provide it? And if we have that bottom-up approach, it'll become obvious what the training requirements are in FET colleges, and then create an articulation into the B.Ed foundation phase. Those are the 5 game changers. Framing, well, we need to reframe education. We need to focus on every child, not on the facility. We need to have some sort of franchise that holds together our approach, that enables people to feel that they belong to something bigger than themselves, that galvanizes South Africa for the child. We need to have family-driven demand instead of constantly driving it by supply. And we need to have a bottom-up approach to education and training. We're in a quagmire in education in South Africa. We need systematic, inexorable progress. But we also need radical game changers. Early childhood development may well be just that thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry, for that introduction, because I'm not an ECD practitioner and I'm not an ECD specialist. I'm a social development practitioner. I'm involved in training of trainers myself, so that conversation we had earlier on today about supervision and actually bedding practices into institutional life is a really big area of interest for me. And I also work as an evaluator of practice rather than of impact. And I got to know Khuleleka through being asked to go and look at do an evaluation of their practice. Now, the practice I want to talk about is not of teachers or parents or caregivers with children. The practice I was asked to help Khuleleka evaluate was that of the trainers of trainers. So we're talking about adult to adult practice. We're talking about the practice of trainers who are trying to get some kind of scale going. They're trying to embed a whole lot of skills and sensibilities in a community of trainers who themselves go and interact with other practitioners or with children. So that is the Khuleleka High Scope program. And that was my engagement with the organization. So I'm going to be talking to you about the Training of Trainers program. I'd say this is an example of a transformative project that works. And as Sherry said, I'm here presenting for Khuleleka. So I want to start with this lovely quote. And I want to ask you just to sort of notice what strikes you in this quote. This is a woman who was trained many years ago in the high scope approach. And when I went and spoke to her and I said to her, tell me about this thing, this is what she said to me. She said, the parents, they say, this is what we missed as children, to let the children lead, to listen to the children. Even me, if I think of my life, I think it could have been different. I could even maybe. And then she became so shy and almost tearful. She said, maybe I could have been a doctor, because she didn't want to claim she was a doctor who didn't get realized. But she said, maybe I could have been a doctor, who knows? This is an example of what this program can achieve. In the words of a Khuleleka staff member, a senior staff member, when I said to her, what is the essential difference that this program makes? She said, what is sustainable is how these practitioners think, and that will never be lost. So we're talking about a human capital development strategy here. It's got zero infrastructure, zero resources. It's just got person to person. And these are the kinds of impressions that I encountered when I went and did this evaluation. What does it teach? Because now I was doing this, and you can imagine, I'm not ECD. I was overwhelmed by the colors and the resources and the frameworks and the things and the debates and the issues. But what came out of it for me at the end, what did I pull out of it? I found that it teaches two things. The one thing, it teaches the trainers, and the trainers by extension, eventually the teachers or the practitioners, helps them to understand the process by which teaching and learning happens. They understand the processes, so they have quite a lot of content. There's a lot of branded stuff that goes on there, but what they really taught is to understand that process of teaching and learning. And I found this beautiful description of the difference between learning process and content by a woman who runs Origami for Africa, Kyoko Kimura. And she says, the people who don't know the process or the skills, they want to get the products. But the people who know the process and have skills want to get resources. And the latter create value and thrive. And I think that this is one of the key takeouts that call them graduates of the TOT program have. They understand the process by which they're going to train others, and they also understand the process by which young children learn and develop. The other thing that the TOT teaches, so the one is process, is the idea of a practice. Now, everyone here is involved in education in some way or another. I know there are great theoretical debates. Are you giving people a thing, or are you giving them a skill? Are you giving them a noun, or are you giving them a verb? TOT gives them a verb. It gives them a skill in actually doing something. So for me, it's illustrated by this. I don't think you can see it clearly, but it's a very old, worn-out picture I've got on my notice board taken from a Tony Ross book. Called The Little Princess. And what's being said here is the little princess is looking up at the admiral with big, wide, admiring eyes. And she says, what is the best way to be? She asks the admiral. And the admiral's answer is, be good at swimming. And this, for me, sums up TOT. Be good at something. Be good at what you're doing. And then make sure that what you're doing is manageable and sufficiently modest, but also sufficient to the task. So more basically, what's in the high scope curriculum itself, 5 simple principles. Oh! This is appropriate for me. It's the 3rd time I've ever given a PowerPoint presentation. So did I kick something? Okay, I'm going to read you the principles so long. So, active learning, luckily it's here on my screen. The principle of active learning, that's going to be familiar to everyone here who knows ECD. Adult-child interaction, I'm sure many ECD methods have got an approach to adult-child interaction. Organizing the learning environment, very important. Daily routine, regular systematic assessment. When Professor Janssen was talking yesterday, I was amazed, and I said to Sherry, that's all high scope, that's all high scope. All of those principles, they're there. They're in many of the approaches that we work with. So for me, the question is, okay, we can look at high scope, we can say, oh yeah, cool, no, we know that. So again, I had to ask myself the question, so what makes this a project that works? How does Khuleleka pull it off? What is the practice that is being not just promoted now in others, but what is the practice that Khuleleka itself follows? 2 things in how Khuleleka, this NGO, deploys its training of trainers approach. It's a value-based approach grounded in practical deeds. It's the most important thing I discovered in this project. It's not the only project in South Africa that does this, but this one does it. I'm happy to carry on, shall I? Yeah. You have the idea of value-based approaches to education, and there's a great anxiety in South Africa, I think, about those because they go so high up and they become so principled and so abstract and esoteric that no good is done on the ground. So how do we connect these incredibly important simple values to the done deeds that teachers and trainers of teachers actually enact, that you can see in the moment where they are interacting with others? So Khululeka's got an angle on that. The other thing they've got is devoted staff and visionary leadership. And they have also got a very good intention in rolling out a supervision program. So I'm not going to talk about staff and leadership. I'm not going to talk about supervision. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how this value-based approach manifests in grounded practical deeds. And I'm going to give you 5 examples. Sherry, can I just check on my time? Ooh, okay. I'll give you one big in-depth example and I'll run through the others. Okay, so what I discovered in how Khululeka trains in HighScope is that there's an internal connection between the values and the deeds of the program. So for one example, and this detail will be more familiar to you than it was to me initially, being child-led entails regular child assessment. If you say we've got a child-led program, it's going to freak everyone out, especially the people who want to go to scale. Because then you've just got these untrained, semi-literate, sort of anxious mothers and caregivers and teachers following children around. It can't be. You can't just be child-led. It's naive. But if you say being child-led means we have to have a rational and a clearly scoped basis for assessing children, then you are following the value of being child-led while still grounding it in a very, very clear and defensible practice of assessing the children. Now, HighScope happens to have a framework of key development indicators and very clearly scoped set of outcomes and expectations they have for the children. So they've got a basis for their assessment. So what the teachers are trained in is to pursue the value of being child-led while doing the practice of rigorous child assessment. And you can see when you get these dyads closely connected, they entail one another. So you can also have practitioners who have been trained in regular child assessment who more and more find themselves being child-led in how they practice. Another one, freedom of children to choose demands labeling of the whole environment. Now again, ECD, it's the whole thing about print rich and pictures, and earlier on Ian showed the pictures so the children can stack the things themselves. HighScope's big on that, but it's linked to the value of freedom of choice. So you say to the children, go and take something. Then you say to the children, it's time to pack it away. They've got freedom to act, but it's very well guided and grounded in very detailed labeling. So the HighScope practitioners are amazing. They'll go into a school and they'll know what they're looking for, and it's a particular approach to labeling. It looks to me like any other kind of center, but for them they know exactly what they're looking like because labeling enables freedom. Another one, responsivity to context rewards and requires use of accessible materials and waste. So HighScope doesn't have an emphasis on equipment and toys. HighScope has an emphasis on using found material. They've got a big waste recycling program. There are centers, very informal centers. They don't have to be sort of, in fact, they're generally in HighScope not the big accredited centers. They are ad hoc, responsive, small groups of women and children coming together, and they build their spaces almost entirely out of found materials, furniture, toys, puzzles, shelving, the works. But in order to do this, you have to understand how to use found materials. You have to be alert to your context. If you're alert to your context, you're more likely to find resources in your context. If you're looking for resources in your context, you're going to be very aware of your context. Again, these two entailing one another. Adult-child interaction. It's a very big pedagogy there around adult-child interaction. Listening, questioning, being, beautiful things. But the children get cheeky. They learn how to ask questions. So now, if you're really true to that principle of interacting in a certain way, the children are going to become a certain way. It requires, of necessity, that you have a connection between school and home, so that the children's experience of the adult-child interactions increasingly is coherent. So again, the behaviors and the values are tightly connected. And last one, this is a big thing in ECD, I understand. Should there be themes or not themes? High Scope famously does not pursue preset themes, but it has got a rigorous practice in daily planning. And it's got its KDIs. So eventually it covers the themes. Very, very unskilled people can do this. They know what they're looking for. They do daily planning with the children, and that enables them to let go of preset themes. You can't just abandon themes. You have to have another practice in its place, and High Scope has managed to do that. So back to the beginning, a theory of change. John Berger actually said, let's hope only for what has some chance of being achieved. Let a few things be repaired. A few is a lot. One thing repaired changes 1,000 others. And in High Scope, they're very simple things being changed, or repaired, if we want to say, in the practitioners and the trainers and the teachers that go through it. So like the children who have learned origami, the trick is to know how to go on. And this is what this program offers its graduates, that they learn how to go on. And after all, for so many of these practitioners, particularly those that go to children who will never access formal centres, and with practitioners who themselves will never access the formal education and training program, all they have is this ability to go on and work out of a deeply grounded value base. And then finally, if that's what this is all about, we have to do it properly. So if we can be clear on the one or two things we want to help change in each person, and if we can unlock the processes by which that change is reached, then all that remains is to do it as well as we possibly can, and to practice and to return to it, and to seek continuous improvement. And what I found at Khululeka was exactly this practice of enabling the program to roll out, as we say in South Africa. Thank you.
We started about 10 years ago. By the way, the NGO is not, as it's written in the one program, Ubulele, which means to kill. It's very important, that name. The name Ububele is a isiXhosa word. It means compassion. And it comes from the word amabele, the breast. And the reason we chose the breast, as being a particularly follower of Klein in psychology, is that the relationship between the child and the breast is our first experience of a learning situation. We're near Greater Alexandra Township in Johannesburg. We're a training and a service organization. We started about 12 years ago with a nursery school with 2 children. We've now got 65. The reason is that 65 children from Alex are not going to make any input into the 27,000 children in one township who are below the age of 7. But what we have found is we've got access to their parents and to their real lives. We don't come from a university doing a survey and returning. We hear it on a daily basis. We know about 4 or 5 children out of our school that have been raped under the age of 4. We know about poverty. We know about the effects of abandonment. Of 40% of the mothers in our school are single mothers. So it was that reason that we focused ourselves in a township and in this world. We had a blank sheet of paper when we started. We could have done anything in the NGO world. Over time, we found an identity and believed strongly that the most prophylactic, best value for your buck is in children. When we started the nursery school, we found that we were too late. By the age of 3, something's already happened. By the age of 1 year, something had happened. And so what we've tried to do at Ububele is to link -9 months, working with pregnant mothers, up to the end of preschool, trying little projects and slowly integrating them into a greater field. That's our organization, that's Alex, those are graduates of our team. We train professionals, but most especially we train lay counselors as well, people from the community, and I hope to talk about one of the projects. A School in the Cradle, when they asked me to talk at an education conference, I thought I was out of my depths. But as I heard David Harrison speak, I began to see that it's an enormous combination, a confluence of ideas. I'm coming from the head, from the heart, as somebody said yesterday, and I think a lot of academics are coming from the head, and the two can meet. This is the project I want to speak. We've got many projects, but this is the particular one. Umdlezan is an isiXhosa word or a Nguni word, meaning that period of time when a mother and her baby need to get together when they are bonding, which ties in perfectly with modern attachment theory, with all the latest scientific work that's going in early childhood. I agree with David Harrison. It's the science of early childhood. It is not simply the mother loving a child, but how she loves it, the father's loving it, the parents, a caregiver. It is the relationship between the two that affects later life totally. Physical and mental, scholastic and productivity. The foundations of lifelong mental and physical health are built in early childhood. We're trying to close the gap between what we know, what we've proved scientifically, and what we do, which is not always easy. So it's back to school. A bit early for school? No ways. We all had to. My grandson, a total genius. For mum as well, she has to go to school. Dad as well, one of our young interns. Central to our Ububele Umdlezan parent-infant psychotherapy is the relationship, where it's the relationship between the mother and her father, between the parents and the child, between a caregiver and her client, between a professional caregiver, or as we're using now, more and more lay counselors, people selected from the community who we don't want to call counselors. We feel that there's a big mistake in that unless you spend a lot of time training counselors, what you get are very poor second-rate counselors. What we've tried to do now, our latest effort, is to choose mothers from the community who have certain qualities, capacity for empathy, they need to be a mother, they need to live in the community, they need to be able to speak the language, and as a result, they've got buy-in with the people that they're dealing with. And they go in not as counselors, but as honored visitors or a kind of mentor or friend over this difficult period of early childhood. So, this is how it began. There was a poster up at Oxford Station in the UK talking about parent-infant psychotherapy. I thought, I'd been a psychologist for many years. I'd never heard of doing psychotherapy with infants. And I began to explore, found that there was a literature, called together a number of people who were interested in looking at early childhood, very early childhood, infancy, and we started a reading group at Ububele about 10 years ago, 8, 9 years ago, on a Saturday morning, and found about 15 psychologists and social workers coming to learn about it. None of us knew anything about it. We started learning ourselves. One of the people that we were reading was that lady there, Tessa Barrington from UCT, and she came out in 2007 and actually ran a workshop for us, a workshop for psychologists mainly, to learn how to do parent-infant psychotherapy. She'd been sent and kindly supported by Peter Fonagy from the Anna Freud Center, who is a world authority on attachment and mentalization. And from this workshop, this begat our project. The main therapeutic factor is the considered relationship formed between the parents and a trained worker. Notice I don't call it a psychologist or a social worker because it varies. This is where the second Freud, when she came out for the second time, we decided we had to start training locally. And we sent 2 of our psychologists onto the course with her. They acted as her assistants on the course. The New Beginnings, they did a joint venture with Anna Freud, Wits, and Ububele. They did a work with mothers, an 8-session structured intervention called New Beginnings at shelters for mothers and infants. And we've offered now, since 2007, UU-PIP training for psychologists and social worker, and we've started WIPA, working with parents relationship for people who are lay counselors. So we're addressing that. and we teach them over about 8 sessions about early childhood, about birth, about pregnancy, especially what happens to the mother and the infant in that early period, both the infant of the mother and the mother of the infant, working very much on the idea of a mother holding an infant in mind. It's not simply supplying food, it is supplying an involvement, an interaction, being able to think about the child as a separate human being. We then started what we call the baby map. This is at the Alex Clinic. This is a normal clinic. We started by putting a mat on the floor, and this is a psychologist. This is an auxiliary social worker. She does the translation, and we do a little announcement. If there's any issue other than medical that you'd like to discuss about your baby, and you can see it's hardly the therapeutic confidentiality of a normal psychotherapy situation, but people are enormously respectful. They wait until they can come onto the mat. It's a half-hour intervention, usually half an hour. We don't time it. The mother, we've learned how to structure this. The mothers usually start with something concrete. My baby doesn't take milk, there's something wrong with her poo, etc. That we've learned very quickly to go underneath that and say, well, tell me a little bit about where you come from. We know that depending on the relationship of the mother to her mother, that this is going to influence. We identified whether she's a single mom, where her partner is, what are the supports, and we break the first cycle of isolation. One of the things we've realized is that these women are extremely isolated in dealing with, they don't have health visitors, they don't have people coming to their home. So this was where we began our Umdlazan program. It's been running for, I think, 8 years. We see about 400 to 500 mothers a week. We're in 4 sites in Alex. But our aim is not to work in Alex. Our aim is to get a program going which can be disseminated throughout the country, because we believe this is the first point of breakdown. That's the baby mat. If we see something quite serious, we refer it to the clinic, which we run ourselves, where we'll do something like a 6-session intervention. Of course, you're not going to deal with major issues like maternal depression, postpartum depressions, but you might make a start. And it is quite amazing the benefit that mothers report they receive from that. We've just started this year drop-in groups for mothers and children. These mothers are totally isolated in Alex. They don't have a chance to meet other mothers. We simply started a room once a week for 90 minutes. Mothers bring their babies. We have no agenda other than to have a psychologist and a home visitor listening to them, and we pick up issues there by watching their babies and the mothers interact and help the mothers play with their babies and attach to the babies. So those are called Ntokoza joyful drop-in groups. We've started a new project called the Home Visitors Project, and this has been most exciting. We started by selecting 10 and reducing that down to 5 mothers from Alex. We've been enormously impressed with the quality of these women. They go on a 3-week training with us in the mornings, learning about early childhood, learning about relationships, not learning how to do interventions, making interpretations, but learning to break the isolation of the mother and to work with the mother and the baby. They do not work with the mother. They work with the baby and the mother, drawing the mother's attention all the time. Look, when you smile, the baby smiles. Look, when you get depressed, the baby starts crying. Pointing out the things that we know from all the research that's been going on in early childhood. They solicit or recruit mothers. They don't solicit. They recruit mothers at these primary health centres in Alex, at the four clinics that are available there, and invite any of those who wish to have a visit. And we're doing this as a research project. We've seen 80 moms and babies. We've recorded them before and after the 10 visits. One of the things that came home to us as a result of that project was that we're starting too late. The relationship with the baby begins -9. A mother begins to develop a primary preoccupation with that embryo. And that's the beginning. If you can support that, if you're a teenage mother and you've found yourself pregnant without wanting to, you've got chances are you've got a very negative feeling about this fetus. And so if we can build up the positive aspects of it, the awareness of the mother of the child and the child of the mother, we believe we're making a big impact. We started a teenage HIV mothers group. It did not work 8 years ago. One of the reasons is we don't think it's good to have a specific problem about a mother-infant group, because it starts with the problem dominating the relationship. So we gave that up and started the other groups. We started teenage pregnancy groups. So these are the usual statistics: 50.56 million people 2 years ago, 31% younger than 15,000, 1 million babies born every year. Paternal orphans, 2.5 million, maternal, 600,000, total orphans, 4 million. AIDS orphans, 1.4. Child-headed households, 98,000, much less than one expected, actually. Children living with both parents, 35%, mothers only 40%, father only 3%, neither biological parents, 23%, so with friends or relatives, grandparents, 8%. A few years ago, we began a Gauteng Association of Infant Mental Health, asking other people in private practice to get involved with infant mental health. And it's been launched, it's successful. We went to the World Association of Mental Health Conference in April and are members of that, and Mark Tomlinson is on the board of that very worthwhile organization. We thank you for your attention.
As you can see from the color of my hair, I have lots of grandchildren. In one family, there's one child of 9 and another one who's just turned 3. Her name is Kate. The other day, the 9-year-old phoned me and said, "Papa, do you know that Kate can do arithmetic?" And I said, "Wow, that's pretty good at just turned 3. She said, "Yes, she came to the dinner table and announced, I did 1 fart, and then I did 2 farts. That makes 3 farts." We all know that 1 + 1 + 1 equals 3. But if A interacts with B and C, if B interacts with A and C, if C interacts with A and B, you get a much bigger sum than 3. And that's the thesis of what I want to talk about today. It's like Kate having lentils and beans as well, because you get a bigger explosion. So last year, I met with a group of people, donors, companies, NGOs, all involved in ECD. And they said, we really do respect and acknowledge there's lots of great things happening in ECD, but it's all in silos. And we really need to create a platform to share, because we will be able to generate a bigger impact on ECD. What is the goal? What is the vision that we have? So we focused on the chapter on ECD that's in the National Development Plan. And we said, maybe by creating a whole stakeholder platform, we can help to unravel and roll out the ECD program as defined in the National Development Plan. So I contacted Trevor Manuel, Bobby Godsall, part of the Planning Commission, and said, this is our concept, how do you feel about it? And they were very excited about the concept. But they said, wait a minute, the NPC, the National Planning Commission, has not yet got any mandate to do anything about the NDP, just other than producing it. So they did put me on to Percy Malecki, who is in the presidency and is Trevor's right-hand lady for the whole ECD program. And Percy was battling to break down the doors in the Departments of Social Development, Department of Education and Health. Just to underline this concept of coming together and the impact it has, Camilla kindly sent me a paper produced in January by John Kanier and Mark Kramer this year, where they said collective impact is upending conventional wisdom as to how we achieve social wisdom. Organizations around the world have begun to see collective impact as a new and more effective process for social change. I think what's so exciting at the moment is the level of awareness that is growing about ECD in this country. We've all been operating in silos, but on the part of government, there's a much greater awareness about the need to participate and integrate. On the part of the private sector, there's a much greater understanding of the issues of trying to work together. So, for example, from the conference in East London last year, where the people got together and discussed ECD, they had government there, they had private sector there. That was paralleled with the diagnostic review on ECD, which went into the National Development Plan. The Zero Draft Integrated Program of Action 2013-18 came out, and the departments started talking to each other. Hitherto, the Department of Social Development met with the Department of Education and Health from time to time, but they all just went back and lived in their silos. Now they have put together a program which embraces the whole concept across the department. So on July the 30th this year, the Department of Social Development held a conference at the Emperor's Palace in Kempton Park and proposed a draft terms of reference for an intersectoral body forum that will pull together private sector, public sector. And they envisaged that there would be 2 meetings a year maybe, but we would work together. In parallel with that, our community of practice, which I'll explain to you, that we put together, together with Bridge, who specialize in communities of practice, we were developing the theme, let us try to engage with these 3 departments and establish a technical team, a small, dynamic, 12-member team that can act as an executive and bring together skills from the private sector with the public sector and help to roll things out. I had been told that I could come to the interdepartmental meeting on August the 15th. So we went there on the 15th, and we said to them, we really think this is a marvelous move that you've proposed and putting together this intersectoral forum. Let's have this technical team that can interact as an executive and try and make things happen on a big scale. There were questions and answers that they gave us. They didn't commit to anything. They didn't really engage with us, unfortunately, in an analysis of what the thing would amount to. But I think that's the way the departments work. I mean, they're all a bit skitsy about suddenly having a private sector come in and tell them how to do things. And I emphasize time and again, we are not here to try and tell you how to do your job. You know that. We try to help unroll the whole thing and explore synergies. From the private sector point of view, as I say, the community is getting more and more aware of the need to collaborate. And we joined up with Bridge in January. Bridge specializes in communities of practice in education, and they wanted to focus on ECD this year. And so we're putting together this community of practice in ECD, which meets every 6 weeks, unfortunately always in Johannesburg. And it's a challenge for the members that come from Cape Town or Eastern Cape or Natal to get there. What I'm looking at is to see whether I can find some decent video conferencing facilities so that we can interact with the major cities. But there's huge work going on in the Western Cape, which there's lots of ECD bodies there, and we've heard today a lot coming out of that. Enormously exciting work coming out of the Eastern Cape. I went down to the ECD forum that was established recently by Michelle Kay, and she has got 7 members from the departments in Bishu. She's got a variety of bodies involved in ECD in the Eastern Cape, and it's really buzzing. It's an enormously exciting venture. We have the incredible work being done by ELIFA in the northwest, now stretching into KwaZulu and ultimately to Mpumalanga, a really super model of what's happening. And people are sort of trying to integrate with that and learn from that as to how they can build their own activities. So the community of practice now has in excess of 175 stakeholder members, and I would urge you please to give me your contact details of email address, phone numbers, and what your body is, so that you too can become a party to this. I'll just put you on the stakeholder list. And let's build this whole model of sharing. The focus that we're trying to give this, and clearly the COP can't do everything, the focus that we're focusing on is practitioner training. We know from the audit work, which was sponsored by ELIFA, that we need 80,000 ECD practitioners in the country. We currently are training 2,000 a year. So there's this huge gap. We're currently engaging with the Gauteng Institute for ECD to see how we can help expand the training of ECD trainers in Gauteng. I'm sure there are other moves in other provinces. And then I think the next thing we have to focus on is exactly what ELIFA has been doing, is focusing at the municipal level. There's also the Hollard Kaya Yabanda example model that's been developed over some years in the Sedibeng area, the Midvaal area, which was fascinating in that they went in, engaged with the municipality, said, what do you know about your communities? What do you know about your parents? What do you know about your children? They took them in, introduced them, and got the whole communities working with the municipality to be able to roll things out. So there are models that I think are very exciting to try and replicate. One of my hobby horses from way back has been people retire, they've got energy, they've played their golf for a year, and they're looking for something to do. Whether they're business people, whether they're educationalists, whatever, let us harness them, train them as mentors, and make them available to all of the points of energy in government, in private sector, that need some kind of mentoring, some kind of way of going forward. And we've heard last night a little bit about the mentoring which is beginning to take place. I believe that we need to create pools of these retirees, as I did for 5 years in the Eastern Cape, when I pulled together all those retirees along the coast. We trained them as mentors, we put them together with protégés in the government, and where we were able to interact, made big advances in delivery. That failed ultimately because of the Eastern Cape changing its Director General, and the thing fell apart, unfortunately. So there we are. I think if we can work together, we can produce the elephantine fart rather than just the 3 farts of my granddaughter. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. And so first up, good morning. Thanks to Sherry and Camilla for all the prep work and everything. And I don't know how Camilla does it, but and I was one of the really bad people. She only got my slides yesterday afternoon. So I'm from Cape Town. Professor Jansen said last night that most Cape Townians think that God stopped working at the De Tooitskloof. I'm not sure if that's true, but I do know that I come from the most beautiful place in the world, and maybe Bloemfontein is second, so it's nice to be here. So I just want to talk very briefly about my perspective, where I'm coming from. I'm a public health person. I'm a trained clinical psychologist, but for me, I'm interested in public health. I'm interested in trying to get programs implemented at scale to benefit as many children as we can, as many infants and children. So there's a famous story, about a public health story, many of you have probably heard this, of someone having a picnic at a river, and it's quite a fast-flowing river, and notice there's a child floating past. So they quickly get in, rescue that child, keep them warm, dry them, and then there's another one. And they do that, and they've done this about 10 times, and they're actually starting to get tired. And so what they decide to do is to walk up the river to try and find out where all these children floating down the river come from. So I'm very interested in that child floating down the river, but I'm also very interested in trying to understand what's happening upstream. This is just in terms of this sort of just to try and situate where I'm coming from a global health perspective. And I think it has resonance. We talk about South Africa. David was talking about South Africa and the lack of services. That's not just a South African issue. That's a global issue. And very much a lot of the global health perspective has been on keeping infants and children alive. And there have been remarkable successes. So, for example, the global under 5 mortality rate in the last 20 years has dropped from close to 12 million to 7 million. That is a remarkable achievement. But very often what's happening in global health is that where it stops. And then we don't think about all the other children that are surviving, and those children, the context in which they are then surviving. And I think it's very, very, very important that the context the children are dying in are often the same ones that many, many more children are in fact living in. And from the Lancet series, you know that 200 million children under 5 years are not meeting their developmental potential. And there's a host of reasons from that, from poor nutrition to conditions, to infections, to a whole number of things, and certainly to early childhood development services and interventions. Poverty, malnutrition, and understimulating home environments are absolutely central in this. Okay, why early is good? This is from a lovely book that anybody can download online. It's possibly a little dated now, but from Neurons to Neighborhoods. It's free, available online. You can download it. It's enormous. And basically showing the kinds of things that are happening, what we're talking about in terms of conception, but in terms of higher cognitive functioning, receptive language, seeing, hearing. And a lot of it is happening here. And in fact, in terms of the focus of this conference, often around, or most conferences around education, it's at this point here. This is where school starts. And obviously, a lot is still happening until 18, and we're increasingly becoming aware of how much continues to happen in terms of brain development in adolescence. But the trajectory is already downwards. If we don't do stuff here, it's hugely problematic. We're missing a very, very important opportunity. And in terms of the cost of intervening early or intervening late, this is from the work of James Heckman. And in his initial work, he didn't have the conception. It started at preschool. And this is not supposed to say that you can't do anything here down at school. You can do things. It's never too late. There are some things you can do. But in terms of the cost in return on your investment, it's already significantly more expensive to try and intervene late than to try and prevent and intervene early. Again, the red arrow, that's where school is. Okay, school readiness used to be, I was a trained clinical psychologist. We did school readiness assessments at age 5.5 or 6, and that's what school readiness is. School readiness is not about that. It's about, of course, that's a component of it, but it starts in the womb. It starts with what the mother is eating. It starts with what Tony was talking about her conceptions in her mind, her kind of conceptualization of that fetus. It starts there. And the notion of developmental cascades is something that's that's receiving a lot of research attention at the moment. And the idea that certain experiences build on other experiences in a very positive way, but equally in a very negative way. So the best example is, for example, a child who has attention difficulties or has difficulties in planning is going to be the same child that is going to find it difficult to sit in a desk and to concentrate on what the teacher is saying. He's going to find that incredibly difficult. And because of that, then gets into a negative cycle with the teacher. Is the child that's the first to get excluded, becomes a bit of a troublemaker. And this is what these developmental cascades are about. And if you're only intervening in adolescence, you're in trouble. On the aeroplane yesterday, I read a lovely quote from Faye Weldon talking about parenting. And she says that parenting, when you become a parent for the first time, it's the first time you realize you're not a very nice person. And that in fact, when you have teenagers, you then absolutely realize how all wars begin. And I think, and those cascades are important. This is from, I think Tony had a slide about the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University. All their materials also free online, very useful. Why I wanted to say this is I'm a little bit of a troublemaker, so the idea of conception to career, I want to say actually it's before. We know that the nutritional status of women before they become pregnant is central to the extent to which the fetus grows optimally. And we know that the nutritional status of a pregnant woman is important. And we also know that the nutritional status, obviously, of that baby is important. And if we intervene all those stages, we have an enormous impact on that child. But the thing I find staggering, and this speaks to Professor Jansen's point yesterday on the Japanese example about thinking 30 years in advance, the biggest impact we have if we do all those things, woman nutrition, pregnant woman nutrition, the baby, is on the child of the child. It's that next generation that you have your biggest impact. Try to sell that to a funder, but so the question, I suppose, where do we start, is that obviously woman nutrition comes back to teenage mothers and it comes back to women and girls, so we could just keep going on and on. But Polanyi. I'm not going to describe Polanyi in too much. It's existed since 1979. Bishop Tutu Art the Arch is the patron of Polanyi. Started out as a nutrition intervention organization, has now become a far broader community-based organization that does home visiting. So it starts in pregnancy and it moves through the first 6 months initially, but also afterwards. And in fact also works at a community level in terms of nutrition or malnourished children in rehabilitating them. So that continues. And community health workers, mentor mothers are at the core of that. 3 innovations. Polanyi selects they recruit very, very carefully. There's this notion of positive peer deviance that they use. The idea, it sounds terrible, it's the idea that you take women from within the community who have the same struggles, many of the same adversity, but themselves have had children that have grown up and thrived. So something they've done has worked. So they're considered positive peer deviance. The selection process of Polanyi is intensive, incredibly intensive, and very thorough. And they don't hold punches. They choose the best people. Training. Training is absolutely essential. This is a bit of a busy slide. But in terms of one of my big issues in terms of public health and scale up is around, right now what's happening is that teachers are being told, you must do this extra thing. Nurses are being told, you must do all these things because we don't have enough doctors. Community health workers are being told, you've got to do extra things. The reality is, if you're training anybody, from a community health worker to a teacher to a doctor, I would argue, there's a core foundation that is absolutely common to everybody. And we need to get everybody trained using foundational elements, which are about knowledge, committing to change, about role plays. It doesn't matter what the intervention is, that's there. You then have specific content. So in Polanyi, it's alcohol, it's HIV, it's maternal mental health, it's a whole suite of things. In a school situation, it might be something quite different. And then absolutely very important is that local tailoring. What might work in Khayelitsha, where I work, may not work in Zitalele in the Eastern Cape. So training is essential. And then I would argue absolutely central is supervision and management. Polanyi does good old group-based, individual-based, face-to-face supervision. We also developed with them a web-based system of monitoring and evaluation, and I can send papers we've written on this to anybody who's interested on how we've done the system. So I can, for example, here today, log onto my computer and I can find out who's visiting who today. It's unlikely to be happening on a Saturday morning, but if it is, I can do that. It's been incredibly useful for us in terms of, and that supervision of management is central. There's a lot of evidence from the world, good research evidence of how community-based programs work. But they often work when they're controlled by NGOs, very tightly, and controlled by the researchers. And when they're taken to scale, they fail. And I would argue supervision and management are central in that. So what next? I'm very, very interested in the scale-up. And as I've just said, when things get scaled up, they tend not to work. Okay, I don't have an answer for this. We have to be thinking about this, and I know that DG Murray Trust, and I know a lot, and Sherry, and and Elifa, and various people are giving concerted thought to this. But we need to be thinking about how we scale up successful programs. Otherwise, they remain very small, and obviously small can be good, but we need to be thinking scale up. I'd just like to acknowledge Dr. Ingrid LaRue, who founded Polani 29 years ago, Kwani, who essentially runs a lot of the supervision and management, Professor Mary Jane Rotherham, my main research collaborator, Alifa for the funding of our follow-up. We've conducted a randomized controlled trial in Polani, and we're following up those children, the National Institute of Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse in the US, and obviously the mothers and children in our study. Thank you.
My colleagues and I at the Kaylee campaign have developed a doable occupational therapy service for ECD centres in the informal communities in Cape Town where we work. For those of you who maybe don't know, an occupational therapist is a health professional trained to assist children with barriers to learning by assessing and developing the underlying skills that allow for successful task completion. And each occupational therapist works with a community worker who is invaluable in building relationships with the community and providing a mother tongue and culturally sensitive service. So to start with an analogy, please sit back and reflect for a moment on a three-legged potjie standing over the warm coals. The meat, vegetables, and potatoes have been carefully prepared and laid in the pot. As the hours go by, you'll get delicious smells, and after a few hours of adjusting the coals, a delicious potjie course meal will be ready to enjoy by a large number of family and friends. I believe the essence of good potjie course lies in careful preparation, a stable three-legged pot, and adjustments to the fire over a long period of time. And these principles fit well with our service, and I'll come back to them. I think it's generally acknowledged, and we've seen firsthand when we've been supporting children with actual disabilities in mainstream classrooms, that a lot of their peers are also falling behind. And we believe this is partly because they don't have the underlying developmental skills during their ECD years to really be ready for formal schooling. And underlying developmental skills include things like gross motor, fine motor, perceptual, visual, communication, and social skills. And I think these skills combine later then to allow the children to learn to read and write and calculate. And I think we all know the serious negative consequences for the individual child, their teachers, their parents, and South Africa as a whole if these children aren't ready for formal schooling. And I think we also all know that specialised services for children with barriers to learning aren't really already available at ECD level in South Africa. And as occupational therapists, there's so few of us that just providing support for a few individual, usually rich children is really inadequate. So we decided to work alongside ECD teachers in their own classrooms. We generally offer a series of 4 one-hour workshops for the whole class during the period of a month. And during these groups, we role model to the teachers how to use sequences of developmental skills that are linked and that help the children learn. This expands the ECD teachers' own skill base, and they can use it over time with all the learners. So an example of a group we might do with 5-year-olds is to start by standing in a circle. And I'm an OT, so I'm afraid I need to get practical. So we would do passing the beanbag over and in a circle, point out to the teachers. They might just see this as a game, but that the children are actually learning eye-hand coordination, they're learning about turn taking, they're learning about their body image, and all those are prerequisite skills for later scholastic ability. We would then continue the same activity on a smaller scale with more fine motor needs, with a lacing activity. We're still going under, we're still going over. And then we might go to an even finer activity like drawing outside with chalk on the concrete in an up-down pattern. So to show the teachers, how to use gross motor activities, 3D activities, to prepare children for 2D activities, bookwork later on. What we also find in the ECD centres where we go, which are mainly in the poorer areas, is that rote learning is overvalued and that gross motor activity is undervalued. So we also explain to ECD teachers how directed gross motor play really helps to develop motor planning skills, and those motor planning skills are going to later translate into the child being able to spell, put the letters together in the right sequence, being able to form the letters on the page, on the lines. We do things like setting up an obstacle course in the classroom. They don't have any fancy equipment, but just tables and chairs. You can make a tunnel, crawl under the tables, run in and out of chairs, climb over tables if the teacher will let you, jump off chairs, roll on the mat. All those have huge benefit and pre-scholastic, it develops those underlying skills. And it's a nice way of showing the teachers maybe they don't have a playground outside, or maybe the weather's bad, the children can't go outside, but that you can do things in the classroom as well in a different way. And then we also spend time problem solving with the teachers, how to actually identify and assist the many learners in their class. And we generally see about a third of the learners in a general class who've actually got specific barriers to learning. Sometimes the teachers need help to identify them. They're the ones who maybe talk their way out of everything, so they come across as being very able, but actually can't draw a picture, can't do anything. So those hidden kids with barriers, and also the ones who present in the difficult behavior problem kids who running around, won't sit still, won't finish a task. And sometimes all the teachers need is just someone to come and say, when the child's doing that, how about making your instructions more simple? Maybe they can't process complex instructions. How about breaking down the task with the over-under? We normally have to practice 5 minutes just going over everyone's head, and then 5 minutes going under everyone's legs before we can actually combine and do an over-under sequence in a circle. So that thing of breaking down a task into manageable steps for the child. Other things like giving consistent rewards, and letting the kids get up and do high energy activities in between being expected to sit still all day. That can often help them release energy and then improve their focus. Other things, simple things that teachers sometimes don't know, is make sure the children are sitting right. If you want them to draw a nice picture for you, make sure they aren't lying, make sure they're close to the table, sitting up straight. Have a look at their pen grip. Are they using a nice grip, or are they doing this? Or, just showing the teacher and the child how to effectively hold the pen. Things with cutting, using the thumbs up approach. So having both thumbs facing up. Just teaching the methods often improves the cutting quality and the writing quality. And then we also focus with the teachers, which is kind of what occupational therapists do when you have a child with a problem, on backward chaining. So this is the problem. What is the barrier that's stopping the child from being able to draw a picture of a person, say? So you'll get a 5-year-old who's still just drawing a circle if you ask them to draw a person. So it could be various reasons, but just getting the child to draw a picture every day is going to be helpful, but it will be more helpful if they also maybe look at themselves in a mirror or trace around their body parts, or sing action songs. So getting teachers to make that link. This is the problem. Looking back, what skills maybe hasn't the child got that I can develop to get to where I want to do, that they can now draw a nice picture of themselves. What we've also found is ECD teachers often just need someone to be with them when they tell the parents that they think this child's got a problem. Parents often don't want to hear that the child has a problem, or their sort of perception is, oh, my child can walk and talk, they're fine, they're school ready. So just sort of being there alongside the teacher when they have to maybe have that discussion with the parent. And then also helping with making referrals to clinics or hospitals if the child's got a vision problem or a hearing problem or medical problem that's going to hinder their learning. And then we've also found that returning to the same ECD centres for just quite short periods, but going back every year, is more beneficial than working intensively in one place. It takes time to develop relationships, and the teachers are often more ready when you come back the second year to ask the things that they actually want to know and the information that they're actually going to make use of, rather than going there, telling them all the stuff and then never going back. And then each year we try and leave behind a different resource. We've got a set of books. The Cayley campaign is obviously focused on inclusion, so a set of books about including children with disabilities, posters to help the parents and teachers identify maybe when a younger child isn't meeting the developmental milestones that are expected. and just sort of general activity ideas that they can add to what they're already doing in the classroom. And of course, I think it's been alluded to in previous talks that parents are the third and the vital leg of the Potjie pot. Without parental involvement to enhance children's developmental skills at home, the child, like the Potjie, is going to fall over into the fire. And lack of parental involvement is a common problem that comes up is brought up by teachers. And we found it's partly because the parents don't really understand their role in education. They don't feel confident in what they must do and what they can do. So we've developed a series of 3 2-hour workshops for parents of 4 to 6-year-olds. We start by affirming that they are crucial in their child's success throughout their lives. We use experiential adult education principles, and parents actually get to do art activities, tell stories, play ball games, so that they understand what's required of their children at ECD level, because many of them didn't have ECD experience. We also facilitate a lot of sharing of ideas between the parents in pairs and small groups, so that they come up with ideas to enhance their children's underlying developmental skills in a way that are culturally appropriate. We did get feedback that our activities are too Western, so we try and let the parents come up with ideas, think back to their own childhoods, what did they actually do to develop their fine motor skills, their gross motor skills, and then also that they share with each other what resources are available in the community. Where are the play parks, what's offered at the clinic, where the library is, things like that. In the words of parents, we learn through playing and practical group work how to do activities with our children to get them ready for school. Parents really seem to appreciate information about what is expected of their child at a certain age. And again, in the words of parents, we liked what we learned because now we know what our children need to know, and we know what the school expects of us and the child. And I think any teachers among you might appreciate comments like, "It opened my eyes to know what I must start doing now to help my child achieve their dreams. And I realized that it is not only the teachers who must teach the child, but that the parents need to participate as well. I know how to see when my child has a problem and how to fix it." Knowing what's expected of a child at a certain age allows parents themselves to identify problems. And like we do with the teachers, we also then give parents ideas on how to assist with specific barriers to learning by backward chaining, and also guide them when they should ask for help from the teacher, when they need to take their child to other professionals. And then, as you can see in the picture, at the end of the workshop, the parents are given a box of stationery and educational equipment to use with their child at home. And after the workshop, they're well equipped to make use of the resource, rather than just giving out the resource to parents without doing the workshop. So coming back to the principles of the Potjie course analogy, like the correct layering of food, preparation for formal schooling is key, and a pair consisting of an occupational therapist and a community worker can assist ECD centres to effectively prepare children for formal schooling by emphasising a developmental and problem-solving approach. Like the stability gained from the 3 legs, a child needs input from their teacher, parent, and their parent to succeed at school. And as professionals who may be coming into sport ECD centres, we can only really be effective if we work with the child, the parent, and the teacher at the same time. And lastly, long-term input is important and can be done in a relatively cost-effective manner for a large number of learners by providing intermittent occupational therapy intervention in the same classrooms on an annual basis, because there's the compound effect over time. All right, thank you.
My name is Ian. Those weren't my words. We've been fortunate enough to have an entrepreneur who became, after hearing about conditions in creches across South Africa, and apparently according to the HSRC, there's about 22 to 25,000 daycare creches across South Africa. His name is Ian Buchan, and he's a man who's a businessman who sheds tears. And when he heard about the children in the creches of South Africa, I've actually seen tears run in his eyes. The words that you saw there are not boastful words, because the programs he's talking about, he didn't design personally, he enabled them. He's a businessman, and the only businessman that I know now, and I work with a lot of KZN's wealthiest men, he's the only businessman that I know who's investing his family's inheritance in early childhood. So he took on two very experienced educationists, between them having more than 80 years experience in education, to roll out a program which will enable a game change in early childhood. The Unlimited Child is a story, and that story at this very moment is being told in Hong Kong, it's being told in Brisbane, it's being told in Sydney. The story is also being told right now in London. It's being told in Florida, USA. It's being told in Northern California. It's being told right now in Cape Town. And today, part of the story will be told in Bloemfontein in a very, very hasty period of time. There's a creche in a place called Mthatha in the old Transkei. And it's alongside the N2 highway. And it's an RDP house that's been converted into a creche or a daycare center. And in that particular creche, there are 18 children cared for by a woman who earns a living by caring for these children. The children are deposited there by their mothers. At 8 o'clock, the door is locked because there's no fence between the N2 and this particular building. There's one window in the building, and that is closed at 8 o'clock so the children can't climb out. Now, if you've ever been into the Transkei in the middle of a summer, can you imagine 18 children and one daycare woman in this house where the door is closed and the window is locked? And it was that particular creche that got us going. We knew that something had to be done. We all know about white paper. Frida, is it white paper number 5 of 2002? And they spoke about 2010. Well, in 2010, I happened to go into a grade R class in a shanty town called Quarry Heights near KwaMashu in Durban. And in this grade R class, there were 2 teachers, both with a level 4 qualification, and 65 children in a prefab room. The desks were desks designed for grade 7s. And these 65 children were sitting and reciting, learned alphabets, and whatever else they did in this particular grade R class. Meaningless stuff. And sadly, that goes on across Africa, and David's already referred to that kind of problem in learning. The question is, and it was referred to last night, both by Jonathan Jensen and by Mahovia, the question is, can our children wait another day? And Jonathan is correct in saying that when you're starting a new project and a new idea, you can't hurry before you've actually got your infrastructure in place. But our concern is that every day wasted, every year wasted in early childhood, another cohort of children is going to be a missed generation. Our children just can't wait anymore. We've been talking for 20 years. In 2008, a group of us realized that something had to be done on a larger scale. Ian Buchan, the motivator behind our project, wanted to take kits of toys and take them to 22,000 creches across South Africa and place them in the creches so that there were toys available for the children to get the stimulation needed, fine motor coordination, gross motor coordination, and other activities needed to stimulate the children. Well, GAME, a company in KZN, and I assume elsewhere, Mass Cash, we're already doing that. Depositing these lovely cabinets of toys in creches across KZN. And those cabinets of toys were never opened because the ladies didn't know how to use them. And so that's when I phoned my colleague, because Frida and I did our 5 years penance in the Department of Education in Pretoria under 3 ministers. I phoned Frida and I said, Frida, where do we go with this idea of Ian Buchan's? And she flew down, and she was the person who gave us the direction. She's telling me that I've only got 5 minutes left. She was the person who gave us the correct direction to go. The model is a simple one. There's our scorecard over 5 years. And although we've reached over 314 creches, and we have another 40 creches who come to our meetings that we haven't reached yet, we're not going to say to you that we've won in every one, because we've failed forward in many instances, and we would be lying to you if we had transformed every creche. But over 5 years, we've transformed, actually visibly transformed 250 creches. And I know that it's not measured empirically, but we had a young lady from Cape Town, Nadia Lubowski, came up to see our project in Durban a couple of weeks ago, and we took her into one of our pilot creches. And afterwards she came away and said, Ian, the skin, the hair on my arms was really, and there were goosebumps on my skin. She said, I've never been in a disadvantaged creche before and seen a woman multitasking and multi-activities going on within the same grade R, the 3-year-olds, the 4-year-olds. And she went away and said, well, we're taking the Unlimited Child to Cape Town. And that's the replication we would like to share with you. 30,000 children we've reached, but it's not worth doing it unless it's a quality project. The model is based or informed by 2 objectives. The first is to get quality learning equipment into creches and ongoing support. And then the training to use that equipment, and that's where Frida came into it. The second is that there's got to be a continuation of the learning, and that learning goes on by grouping clusters of creches in geographic areas, and we have these cluster meetings and new learning takes place so that the learning is continuous. Those are our 2 objectives, but it's also underpinned by internationally accepted principles that early childhood is the very foundation of the education house, and also underpinned by the fact that little children learn through play, not through traditional formal classrooms. Little children learn through play. And so some of the things in the model, well, I'll just go through 1 or 2 of the things in the model. We start by selecting creches. We do baseline surveys, and those baselines become records. And then we select creches, and we do sometimes reject if we think there's no passion. We look for the right person, the 3 Ps, the right place, the right person, and if there's no passion, it's not worth starting. And so we have made some mistakes. Once we've selected the creches and done the baselines, we then do the training, which was informed by Frida Wilkins and is completely aligned, was aligned to the old RNCS, and now is aligned to NELS and to the new framework. We're completely aligned to where the curriculum takes us. We have a caregiver training program. We have a monitoring system which is absolutely essential. Without monitoring, our project would fail hopelessly. And at the moment, we've got a monitor who is very, very ill. She's losing her sight. And her 40 creches aren't being monitored, and we can see the weeds growing already. It's easily replicated. So let's have a look quickly. There's Frida in the middle of some of our caregivers. Those caregivers were trained in 2009, and their creches are still going. They've still got our equipment. You can see our equipment in the creches still being used. It's because it's quality equipment. It's not rubbish. It's quality equipment. It's the same equipment you'll find in an exclusive preschool in La Lucia or Houghton. We give them a daily program. Jonathan Jensen spoke about Afrikaans schools having routine. We agree with them. We give our creches routine. So there, the routine we give them in pictures because children can't read. There you've got a woman doing the early morning ring, and there's one, that's just a prefab in the middle of the Umgeni Valley, and there's this woman who we've trained doing her ring in her daily program. We provide them with kits of toys that take the children from 6 months to grade R. And the children know how to use those toys. Quality toys, not rubbish. They have to be the best. Those blocks are unlimited child blocks. Frida gave me the guidance and I had them made in Durban. And you can see the way they stack, that the children stack them themselves and they learn through the stacking of those blocks. They learn shapes. There's no color on those blocks because blocks are about construction. They're not about colors. We monitor in geographic clusters, and the support of the monitoring comes through these cluster meetings. The Unlimited Child is a story, and here's a little story. I know that my last minute is up, but that's Hlingiwe, and let me just tell you the story, because even the hardened men, and I was a school principal, and I was most probably known by all sorts of names as a school principal, but I now shed tears in my job. I actually shed tears. Now here's a young girl that Frida and I found when we were training in 2011. And she immediately struck us. She's now 22 years of age. And we asked her if she'd like to join our training team as an interpreter and as an assistant trainer. And she was excited by that because her income was 700 Rand a month. That's what she earned as a creche caregiver, 700 Rand a month. Now that's about average across the country. The Unlimited has now employed Hlingiwe as a monitor and a trainer. And she actually goes out to cluster meetings and trains caregivers twice her age, and they respect her. She's absolutely brilliant, and she's never been to university. That's what's wrong about our country. There is Hlingiwe. She should be the next Frida Wilkins, the first black Frida Wilkins in this country. But you know, she can't afford to go to university. She's absolutely brilliant, a story in itself. But she does go out and she runs our cluster meetings. That's her program, not ours. That's her training of the creche caregivers. And that's how we keep the thing going. We've made mistakes, we've stopped, we've looked, we've corrected, we've then taken action, and we've moved on. And here's an example. That hut was in a valley, in a desolate valley. And it's a wattle and daub hut. And when they came along to our training, our monitor in the area said, we've got to drop them, they're useless. And one of our other monitors said, no, I'd like to go to that creche called Ubushle and see if we can do something about it. And she went in and she turned it around, she transformed it and had the woman passionate and working. And as a result of that change, we brought partners on board, including a number of Christian churches and some Australians. And they built the Ubushle woman who were running a creche of 30 children in that building. They built her that. They built them that. Now, the Unlimited Child doesn't do that. That's not our focus. Our partners do things like that. And so we have partners that feed. We have partners that build. We have partners in the OT world. We cannot run our project without partnerships, and it's through these partnerships that we can scale up. Thank you very much for that.